Hey everyone, this is Seth from Tippy.com. Welcome to our weekly show focused on everything iPad, from news and how-tos to app and accessory reviews. This is iPad Live.
It's Sunday, December 11th, and joining us tonight, the man you just heard did a spectacular intro for the show, Mr. Seth Clifford. How are you, Seth?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I am very well, thank you. I'm going to move us along slightly, though, because we have a lot to talk about. So I'm going to introduce our very special guest, the editor-in-chief of The Loop, loopinsight.com, the one and only Jim Dalrymple. How are you, Jim?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. There was a lot of really cool news that I wanted your take on, so I appreciate you being here.
You know, I warned you the last time that the next time I was on, I was going to bring my beer. So, you know.
It is a welcome contrast to Seth's whiskey. It's nice to have, just a more audience-friendly beverage on the show.
Come on, whiskey is approachable.
It is. It's just it's a little bit. I don't know. It's just got a little edge to it, Seth. Beer is it's more welcoming.
All right, whatever.
I'm going to quickly move through the meta. We are still doing our Win Your Dream iOS device, whether you want an iPhone, an iPad, whether you want to save some cash for an iPad 3. We are giving you the chance to win your dream iOS device. So head on over to tippy.com/contests. You can enter there. We are also voting now for our Tippy Reader's Choice Awards. So we have the iOS Feature of the Year, the iOS Device of the Year. There were only two. It should be easy to choose one of them. Get on over to there. I will put the link in the show notes. Check those out. And straight on to business. Jim, you did a fantastic article called Understanding Apple's Endgame. There are a lot of blog posts which talk about Apple, but don't seem to actually stop to consider the way Apple conducts their business. And I took this as almost an intervention on your part.
It kind of was, really, when you look at the way that everybody in the market does business. They look at what they can make money doing. Apple looks at how they can change the current market. So it's completely different. And they don't envision a product and say, can we go out and make this product and make a gazillion dollars doing it? They look at the current product market and say, this is wrong, or there's something wrong with the way that these products are made. How can we do that better? Mm-hmm. And market share and money follow that. It follows the way that Apple does the products. So, you take for example Samsung. Samsung sees the iPad on the market. Apple's doing a really good job with it, and Samsung says, "Okay, let's make a copy of the iPad." Well, they didn't make it any better. They just made a copy. So Samsung's strategy is to take a little piece of the market and some of the money that comes out of it. Apple's strategy is to change it. And that's why Apple will continue to lead, because no other company is willing to take the risks that Apple is making. Apple didn't invent the MP3 player. They didn't invent the smartphone, and they didn't invent the tablet. But they made all three of those product categories better with the products that they released. And you can tell that they made them better because every company out there that has products copies what Apple does since they released theirs.
Is that famous Steve Jobs quote where you take care of the top line and the bottom line takes care of itself?
Ho, ho, ho. I saw it. I had to do it. Yeah. So, I mean, everything takes care of itself. When you take care of the product and take care of the customers, the rest will come. And it's not just for the iPhone. I mean, look at what's been happening with the Mac since the iPhone's been released and since the iPod's been released. It's this whole thing. One product is driving demand for another. So you have the iPhone that's driving demand for the Mac. People say, "Wow, this is a really good product. I've been hearing about the Mac. Let's go check it out." And in 95, 96, when I was reporting on Apple, I mean, I was thrilled when Apple would report 600,000 Macs sold in a quarter. Now they're selling millions. Yeah. So, it's not Somebody mentioned the halo effect, and it's true. There really is a halo effect around Apple's products. But if the products weren't good, if the MacBook Air wasn't good, it wouldn't sell. People would start writing reviews about how much it sucked, and that just doesn't happen.
It's interesting, and Seth, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think Jim's absolutely right. I don't see a point in time where Steve Jobs said, look at this Windows tablet PC market. I've got to get a piece of that.
Yeah, well, prior to the iPad's introduction, as Jim said, Apple doesn't always invent products. They just take a product and make it better and make people and make something that people actually want. There wasn't really a market to speak of prior to the introduction of the iPad. Tablets have existed for a long time, but I mean, really, they were vertical market devices that were sold probably straight through to industry, like medical and military and corporate and things like that, where there were specific use cases for them. And I remember seeing people with them and asking, hey, how do you like that? And they're like, it's pretty horrible. Nobody ever had anything really good to say about it. It was basically the best they could do, meeting, the needs of their workday with the mobility of a tablet, and no one was really happy to use them. And then the iPad kind of came along and was like, hey, look, it's thin, it's light, it's not a computer, but it is a computer. It's not all the headaches you have. You don't have to think about taking a pen out and tapping on tiny little targets. It's very natural. It's very intuitive. And of course, the killer part is that when it came out, everyone already knew the iPhone, and that was the thing, right? Everybody kept saying, well, Steve said, you already know the interface. Everybody knows how to use this already. So a tablet released before the iPhone, I don't think would have done as well, because it's not just about what do people want. It's about, when they want it. And timing is absolutely integral in that regard. If they had brought it out first and not explained, the use cases for it, although people said, oh, it's just a big iPod Touch or it's just a big iPhone, that's not a downside to a lot of people. That's really a plus.
The thing that, I think that's really true. And the thing that kind of sparked that Jim's post lit in me was that Apple kind of looked at the tablet market and said, what sucks and how can we make a great tablet? And no one kind of looked at Apple and said, well, what's wrong with the iPad? How can we make an even better tablet? They just kind of wanted a screen in the game. They just wanted to have something in there no matter what it was.
I'm sorry, was that for me?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry too. I was muting because I was coughing. Go ahead, Jim.
What's interesting about the whole iPad market is that if you look back over the tablet market, and Microsoft came out with tablets, they put the tablets on the market, and what they tried to do was to make the PC on a mobile device, basically, where you could do a touch screen, and they didn't understand what a tablet should be.
With a handle.
And it's not that they didn't have the time. They did have the time. I mean, all these companies had the time to develop something that was really good, really cool, but they didn't. And that's what bothers me about companies saying, well, this type of design was inevitable. Well, if it was inevitable, why didn't you do it years ago? Because it wasn't inevitable. Apple looked at the tablet market and said, you know what? This really isn't the right way to do it. What we need to do is make a scaled down OS that is touchscreen enabled, that really does things that people want to do on a tablet, not things that they want to do on the computer. And that's how they started out. But if you notice, they've taken that things that you can do on the computer, and now they're allowing you to do them on the tablet, like record music and manipulate photographs and things like that. And that's great. I mean, things like that, you could never do those on an older tablet.
It's like finger painting with productivity. I can stretch Keynote. It's incredible. That was the thing, Seth. There was a couple, I forget the guy's name. A guy wrote an article basically saying you had to design a tablet like the iPad. It was inevitable. If you go through any sane process, you'll get the iPad. And what struck me with that was, first, no one did that before Apple. And like Jim said, they had lots of time. So if it was inevitable, 1,000 monkeys would have come up with it beforehand. And secondly, I think if people don't want an iPad, they don't want an iPad. It's not that they want an iPad with a Samsung sticker or an HTC sticker on it. So the market isn't even giving people a real choice. They're giving them an iPad with someone else's software.
Well, that's true. I mean, think about the way that other companies deliver products to market, and think about where their focus lies, and it becomes very apparent as to why no one brought an iPad to market before Apple. There are so many different groups of pressures inside a company, exerted on a product from its inception to its delivery to consumers, that it would be very hard, I think, to come up with something as singularly focused as an iPad, and actually bring it out and give it to consumers in a way that would make sense to them. When you try to think about it, in retrospect and hindsight being what it is and all that, yes, there's only kind of quote unquote one way to make a tablet, and it's about this big and it's about that thin and it's a slab and this is the kind of stuff that runs on it. But nobody really probably would have been able to do that, because nobody had the idea to do that at that time, because all that had been shown before was stylus based stuff. And so to have a giant touchscreen like that, I mean, that's the stuff of concept videos. Everybody would be like, oh, that'll be great one day when that happens. And then all of a sudden there it was, and we were holding it. So I think it speaks more to the way that other companies do things. And if you look at other products, you can see that. If you look at some of those, there's some Android phones that have like 4 logos on them, like one for the speakers, one for the carrier, one for the OEM, one for the, whatever. And it's that kind of stuff where everybody has to, everybody has to have a say in it, that makes products not happen for people. They're never really what they need to be. So it's not surprising that it took someone else to do it, and then everyone else to kind of jump off that.
Christy Lynn brought up a good point here. She said, I find it easier to use my MacBook Pro over my iPad 2. And that's true. For a lot of people, it is easier to use the MacBook Pro. What I find interesting is that some people in the media are forcing themselves to use the iPad instead of using a computer. They'll do all the writing and they'll post and they'll do all kinds of crazy things to prove that the iPad can be used as a personal computer. I don't think that that's the way that you should go. That's not the way that I do it. I use the iPad for things when it just comes naturally, so that it fits into the lifestyle that I have. So at the end of the night, when I'm done posting, I'm done writing stories, I'm not going to do anymore, I'll pick up my iPad and go look at some songs, or songs that I'm learning how to do. Sometimes I plug in my guitar to my iPad sitting in my chair at night with just one headphone in, and I'm playing a song and listening to the TV with the other ear. So I wouldn't do that with my MacBook Pro. I'll do research for stories and use Instapaper to save them so that I can get it on my MacBook. There's all kinds of things that I do, but I don't force myself to use it. It's just stuff that's there. It just comes natural. And if I need to use my MacBook Pro to get something done, I'll turn the iPad off and pick up my MacBook Pro for it.
There was a great article this week. It might actually be what Jim is referencing to, about using an iPad as your main computer. And the pros and cons, the way he weighed it out, it was Harry McCracken, was that he wanted 3G connectivity built in, and he wanted 10 hours of battery life. And he was willing to use a Bluetooth keyboard along with his iPad to get that. So that was the trade-off he was making. I'm more like Jim. When I am sitting there writing, I want a MacBook, because I am usually, I have an FTP client. I am very much that multi-tag drag and drop sort of doing 8 things at once kind of person, and that's not how I use an iPad. The iPad for me is more of a focus. Is that right, Jim? Like a focused experience. I do one thing. It's like Apple's commercials. I curl up with it. It's a much more intimate, focused experience. That's
a good point. Yeah, you don't curl up with your MacBook.
I've tried. It's not interested in me.
No, when I go to NAMM in January for the music show, I'll take my iPhone. I always take my iPod Classic wherever I go when I travel, but I always I have a Nano with me as well. I don't use my iPhone for music because I like to keep the battery going for phone calls and stuff, texting. And I'll take an iPad. So, my iPhone, pretty natural what you would use that for when you're at a trade show and, you're going around. But I will write some things on my iPad because carrying around an iPad on a trade show, and a trade show is like carrying around a magazine. It's not very heavy. You can get stuff done with it if you need to. It's great. When I go back to actually write in the hotel, then I'll use my MacBook, probably my 13-inch Air. Yeah. Is what I'll take with me. But when I get back to the room and I need to sit down and work and write, then I'm pulling out the MacBook and I'm going for it. I will, by that time, pictures that I took are in PhotoStream, so they're on my Mac. Things that I've written, I can just either email or sync from my iPad. Because, sometimes you have 15, 20 minutes. You don't want to go back to the hotel. So you sit in a corner somewhere and you can type out your thoughts right then on a story.
Yeah, I triage very similarly. I think that kind of segues nicely into a couple other articles that we had here to talk about. And I'll kind of just put them all out there and maybe get your guys' takes. I'll start with you, Seth. There was one on why iOS seems more fluid than Android. I know we're going to talk about it on Iterate, so I'll just touch on it here. But basically, it was Apple's focus on, according to this guy who was not privy to the code, but was at some point interning on the Android team, Apple prioritizes UI rendering. So if anything else is going on, it'll pause that, it'll render the UI, and then go back to it. So the user is always presented with a fluid experience, where with Android, they're equal. So the UI rendering can pause while something downloads or something else happens, and then they'll redraw it later. And Jacob Nielsen, the big interface guru, someone I was required to learn when I was doing web development, did tests with the Kindle Fire, and it kind of harkened back to what Steve Jobs said about having to shave down your fingers. He said that the interface is as designed now, unless people go and start making 7-inch interfaces, they're not optimal. People miss their touch points. They can't enter text reliably. This kind of brings me back to how Apple really laser-like focuses on that user experience.
Well, that's really the biggest part of, I think, the entire Mac and iOS platform is what it actually brings to the user and what it feels like to use the device. They don't want you to feel like you're working with your iPhone or your iPad. They don't want you to feel like you're climbing up hills just to get simple things done. And they certainly don't want it to be the kind of thing where you flick and scroll and you're waiting for it, or it stutters, or any part of it, that's not seamless, that sticks out. It's kind of like, a stage performance where there's a lot of stuff going on backstage. There's a lot of things happening, people running around, everybody hitting their marks. But what you see in the audience facing straight out from the stage is what, that's your quote unquote user experience. And they want that to be perfect. And just like a stage performance, everything has to go off just perfectly. And what that often means is making compromises. So in the case of the scrolling, in order to make the audience see exactly what you want, other things have to take a back seat to that, that process that's going to make the scrolling perfect. And in terms of stuff like the 7-inch size, I think that Apple does so much research and thinking before they actually settle on what they feel is the quote unquote right size for something, that while I personally like 7 inches for some things, like I liked the playbook size when I held it, it felt good. I don't think it's very usable the way that the iPad is usable. And I think that's something that they again make a decision and say, this is what it's going to be. This is what we want to show people. This is our show.
Well, and the other problem with 7 inches is that it apparently sends executives off the deep end, and they get drunk on planes and chew through restraints. I mean, that's not good. I blame the playbook completely for that.
How did they?
That story gets weirder and weirder every time I hear about it.
But how did they find out that these are RIM employees? I mean, if I was those guys, I would have said I work for Quickie Mart. I would have made sure that was the story.
Or Apple. I work for Apple. Yeah, there's definitely a problem with the 7-inch design, and there is a clear reason why Apple chose a 10-inch. Now, if anybody thinks that Apple didn't try out a 7-inch iPad first, then They're crazy. Of course they did. They tried out 7-inch. They tried out 8, 9, 10. They tried out everything.
They tried out every size that Samsung actually made.
Yeah, they did. And, what Apple felt was that 10 inches was better. Size does matter.
Dr. Mackenstein is saying in the chat room that he thinks that Johnny Ive just has perfectly sized hands.
I saw that.
I think that's absolutely true. But it's that thing that we've spoken about before, that Apple would rather do 10 designs, 3 prototypes, and release one product and do all that internally and not kind of experiment on the general population with 4.5 inches, 5.5 inches, 6.1 inches, 7 inches, 7.5 inches, 8.1, 8.7, 9, 9.2, 9.8, 10. I think Sasha Sagan tweeted out the list of every single Samsung phone size or tablet size the other day.
Well, the problem with the industry is, as I see it, is this. As a customer base, if you tell Samsung, you know what, I'd really love to have a 7-inch tablet, Samsung will say, oh, okay, fine, here, we'll make one for you. Apple will say, no, you don't. That you want a 10-inch. That's what you want. And here it is. And it's better than everybody else's.
And they'll bet the farm on it.
And they'll bet the farm on it because they've already done their tests. Now, Apple doesn't do the focus groups that everybody else does, but Apple does the research that nobody else does. And they're not going to listen to hordes of customers that say, well, I'm not buying one until I get an 8.1 inch. Apple will say, no, you're not going to have that because it's not going to work. And then somebody else will put out an 8.1 inch and nobody will buy it and it'll suck.
Is that like netbooks where they would rather you go buy it from another company than they make something they believe is substandard?
Well, I wrote a story a couple of years ago about the netbooks and why you would never see Apple release a netbook. And I really believe it's because Apple felt that there was nowhere to go with the netbook because it sucks so bad. How can you take a big pile of crap and make it into something? You can't. And there was no way that they could take a netbook, which I believe that it was like 77% or 80% of people that bought a netbook didn't know what a netbook was. They thought it was just another name for a laptop. So, but, they get it home. It's underpowered. It doesn't do what they want. So, they were unhappy with it. So Apple looked at that and said, no, forget it.
Did you ever hear Seth's story about trying to buy a Galaxy Tab, Jim?
Oh, no.
Go ahead, Seth. Give us the brief version.
Well, we do a lot of development for clients, and basically, they ask us to either investigate stuff or build stuff. Long story short, we buy Android phones, Blackberries, whatever we need to build for. I went to get a Galaxy Tab because we thought there was going to be a tablet project coming up. I went to Staples. I asked for it, and the guy basically tried to talk me out of it, firstly, and sell me on the touchpad at the time, which was still like $500 or $600 or whatever it was. This was way before the fire sale. And then when I said, no, I really want the Galaxy Tab, I got grilled from 2 different people. All right, well, what are you going to use it for? I was like, well, what does it matter? Well, a lot of people come in here and they think it's going to replace their laptop and they're going to do all this stuff with it. I said, we're developers. We're fine. Just give me the tablet. It's not a big deal. Well, a lot of times people buy these and they bring it back, and it was just this round and round because apparently people see commercials. They think, oh, this is great. This is totally tiny, smaller than my laptop. I'm going to get this instead. They get the thing. It doesn't do exactly what they want, and they come back to the store.
This flash doesn't work.
It was a bit of an ordeal, but I think just going back to Apple making choices that other companies don't make, I think we might look at it as confidence that they've done all the legwork to choose the one right design that people are going to want. And I think other people might look at it as hubris, that Apple thinks they know better than everybody. But, any way you cut it, there's the results, the results don't lie. There's a bazillion iPads and several 100,000 of whatever else there is. So whether it is confidence or it is hubris, that seems to be resonating with people.
Is that a perfect segue into Eric Schmidt's recent comments, Jim?
Well, I don't know if anything is a perfect segue into anything that Eric Schmidt ever says, but
So he thinks that ice cream sandwich is either, I couldn't really tell. His comments were like translated to Google Translate and then sent back to us or something because they made very little sense. But he was essentially saying that by sheer force of momentum, there will be so much ice cream sandwich out there that developers will be forced to develop for it. They'll be forced to develop for it first, and they're going to have to like it, damn it. Is that a close approximation?
That's pretty close from what I've seen. And pretty short-sighted too, because what he doesn't seem to get is that developers like to make money, and they make money making iOS apps. They don't necessarily make money building Android apps, because a lot of people download free apps for Android and don't download paid apps. So it's not something that I'm saying. This is market research that Android users just don't like to pay for the app. So the developers don't make as much money. It's a fact. So, before he says things like that, he has to understand that they have to look after the developers. And I don't think that they are right now. So if they can look after the developers in 6 months and pull off the major coup over Apple, then, good luck to them.
It's interesting, Seth, because, of course, Windows, even though a lot of geeks do not like Windows anywhere near as much as they like Mac, Windows got such momentum that it became the de facto development platform. And with Google, the argument is usually advertising. It's not that people don't pay for apps, it's that the model is based on advertising. It's got a long sale. And they reported some numbers that showed massive advertising revenue for Google, but it looks like that's actually not for Android advertising, but for all mobile advertising, and a lot of that is from iOS.
Yeah. So I don't know what that really means in terms of Android apps being free and people downloading them that way, but it definitely doesn't. I don't think it leaves a lot of developers with a very good feeling about taking the time to either port an iOS app over, or start from scratch and create, an app identity on Android, knowing that the profits that are being generated for the platform are primarily ad driven and not sale driven.
Did you see that they kind of back and forth between Shifty Jelly and Marco Arment, where Shifty Jelly was talking about the Android market for his podcatcher, and some people were saying it's because there's not a lot of podcatchers yet. And then Marco basically said if someone can make a good Instapaper version for Android, he will give it his blessing.
Yeah, the gauntlet has been thrown.
That'll be interesting, Jim, because it's such a different market. I mean, I can go in there and see bootleg Calvin and Hobbes apps at the top of the chart, and only one or two of a product category. Where in the iPhone, we were just looking at Twitter apps this week, and there's like 36 really good Twitter apps for iOS.
Yeah, and that's because if a developer releases an app and gets stories written or links from you guys, or Gruber or any other site, then right, then they start getting popular. The word spreads, and people, for 99 cents, people will go and download an app and try it, even if they don't like it. For $1, they'll download it, try it, because it's getting so much press. The developer gets quite a bit of money from doing that, and they rightfully so. They should. I believe that we need to support those developers, and I have no problem paying $1 or $2 or $3 or whatever it is to support an app. If they don't do a good job, I'm not going to buy any more.
Yeah.
Then I'll move on to somebody else.
Or recommend it, likely.
Right, or recommend it. But there are a lot of good apps out there that I found from website reviews, like from you guys, that I'll look at it and say, well, that looks pretty cool. Maybe I'll give it a try. Some I like, some I don't. It depends on how you work and how you use the device. But I just don't get the impression that Android developers get that kind of support from websites and from users. I mean, look at some of the interfaces that we've seen over the past couple of weeks. I can't remember the app, but it looked like Windows 3. I don't know if you guys remember seeing that. It was an Android app.
I have to look for it now.
It was just terrible. The interface was just terrible. In order for a developer to make money and get press, they have to think about the details, just like Apple does. The iPad is a success, but it's a success because of the developers too. and they need to put the thought and the work into, well, how would Apple do it, or what's the easiest way to do it, or however you want to say it. How is this app going to work best for the users? Not how can we put a better ad up, or how can we, scam people into buying extras. It's got to work.
Jim this is why Jim is the most brilliant segue man in the business. I'm actually going to jump to this because that was a perfect segue to it. There was a massive Twitter redesign this week. And we've kind of talked about this before, but for an end user, the UI is the app because it's what they see. They really have no idea what's going on in the background. And if you switch one socket protocol for another socket protocol, or you buy your maps from one company or another company, they may notice a little bit. But as long as the UI is the same, it kind of feels like the same app to them. But the minute you change that UI, especially significantly, it might as well be a new app. And if it might as well be a new app, a lot of times I think people start, well, I can see what other apps are out there. You kind of lose your hold on them. And I felt that with Twitter. They changed the website and the iPhone app. They have not changed the iPad app yet, though I think it's coming. And Seth, I kind of joked around with this, but this made me think maybe that's why Lauren Brichter of Tweety fame maybe did his exit a little while ago.
Yeah, I had the same thought. Like around the same time that you were saying that, I had that thought, and I was like, "Oh, good, Rene and our mind meld is still very strong.
Yes.
That's good." But yeah, I mean, when you look at it, it's not only different visually, but they've changed so much of the functionality that we came to know and love as Tweety, and then later on as Twitter for iPhone. And they've done it not in a way that makes it better for users. And yeah, people like it. And I've seen people go on and on about how great the new Twitter is, but I don't like it. I'm going on record, okay? The choices that they made are for the business and they're not for the user. And I think that is 100% the wrong thing to do when you're trying to not only grab more users, but create compelling experiences on these mobile devices. If you deliver an experience that is your business drivers in place, it's going to backfire because people spend so much time with these devices, and when you obfuscate things and make things difficult or confuse things, people don't like it. You saw that in the backlash this weekend where there was a mass exodus away from that app to like every other app, most notably Tweetbot. But it's all because they changed things.
They broke faith.
They broke faith and they made Lucas-like choices.
Jim, you were very open when you made a shift on the loop. You decided to put the reader first, and I think your site's always been fantastic, but it's been especially fantastic since you did that. But it seems some companies are kind of going the opposite way now.
Yeah, well, I appreciate what you said, especially since the site sucks so bad. I found it to be, towards the end, I found it to be very bad. Those were my decisions, my responsibility, and I didn't like it. So, yeah, I did make a major change, and, I think everybody's better off for it. I mean, the reader is certainly better off for it. And
you seem happy you're doing it, too. I read the links now. They're like, there's a joy in them.
Yeah, well, there is, because I didn't enjoy going to the website before. I get tired of trying to load it and looking at it and knowing that if I'm frustrated, then the readers are frustrated too. So now it's very clean, and people can just go and read the text and go off. I mean, sometimes we post pictures or a YouTube video or something like that, but most of the time you can get in and out really quick. And what's interesting is that people are staying longer. So they're coming in and they're not just going in and leaving. They're coming in and saying, oh, well, what other links do I want to read?
It's funny. I'm not going to mention any names, but there's sometimes you'll post a how-to and another site will just repost your entire how-to. And my thing is like, no, just link to the other person's how-to because it incentivizes them to make more great stuff for you to link to.
Well, and that's one of the things that comes up when I was looking at what I wanted to do with the whole site was, why should I write an entirely new story about something that another person has already done a great job with? There really is no reason for me to do that. Why don't I just link to the original story that's well written and let the people read that? That's what it should be about. As a website owner and a writer, I'm supposed to give you as a reader the best content that I can. If that best content means that I link to you guys, for instance, to say, here's a really good article that you should read, then that's great. It doesn't matter. I send out, hundreds of thousands of page views every month to other sites. Yeah. And, a lot of people think, well, you should be keeping those for yourself. Well, that's not, it's not the business I'm in. I'm not in it to keep all the page views for myself. I'm in it to share good quality content. And because of that, people come back to see what good quality content that I have to share with them. It may be an article that I wrote. It could be something that you wrote.
And what's the nice thing about it, though, is you get almost like these riffs where different people sort of add their take to the story over time. And another perfect example, Justin Williams, I don't know how to pronounce this, so I apologize, Karpokwa. He broke down the really horrible user experience in Newsstand right now. And he said, reading magazines on the iPad is an exercise in frustration. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. A great device and, more importantly, platform that Apple has created. Magazine publishers have done nothing short of fumble the snap in their own end zone. And you added to that, the first rule of any business should be don't piss off your customers. Many publishers are failing. And the minute you said that, it became clear to me that if you could imagine, instead of iTunes, if Apple had just said, okay, every music publisher, just make your own app. You too, make your own app. Warner, make your own app. It would be such a horrible music experience compared to what iTunes has.
Well, and that's something that you have to look at when you look at the iPad and what competitors have. It's not just the device itself; it's the whole ecosystem. And Apple has spent a decade building up this ecosystem of music, movies, TV shows, books, iTunes, everything. They have spent a decade building this up, and nobody can compete with that. No matter how hard they try to put out a device with content, it's not just the content, but the experience of downloading, reading, listening, watching that content. Absolutely. People say, okay, well, I have an Android device and I can go to Amazon and I can get MP3s from there and I can, get movies or whatever. It's not the same because I can go on my iPad, and or I can go on my iPhone, or for that matter, I can go on my iPod Touch, and I can access that ecosystem, and I can access my content. I can access Apple's content. I can do whatever I need to do, and it's just there for me. And nobody else has that, and that's what people don't seem to get.
It's seamless. It's seamless in a way, and I know the minute that you saw this article, Seth, I felt your stabby stares. It's seamless in a way that Newsstand and the people making apps for Newsstand don't seem to understand.
No, it's exactly right. And I think it comes down to a fundamental disconnect between the way people consume magazines and the way that publishers want people to consume magazines. I was just thinking about this actually while you guys were talking. My wife still, she loves her Kindle, but she still likes to go to the bookstore sometimes, and we'll go there and we'll spend some time there looking at stuff. And I like to hang out mostly in the magazine section. And what I do for most of my time there is I pick magazines up and I flip through them, and I spend a couple of minutes looking at stuff, maybe reading a little bit of an article, deciding, hey, maybe I'll pick this one up, maybe I won't, and kind of just experiencing a bunch of different things all at once. And then maybe walking out with like maybe 2 magazines if I decide to pick some up. When you read a magazine on the iPad, not only is there no natural way to browse that content that people have been used to for decades, but basically the delivery mechanism and then the reading and the updating is so backwards that it actually hurts to use it this way. I went and tried one subscription because it was cheap, and I thought, well, this is $1 an issue. I'll give it a whirl. It was broken within the first month. That like the issue didn't update, and then people were complaining and leaving bad reviews. And finally the update went through, and then I got it, but it was like a month late. Now the other issue is right up there with it. I'm 2 months behind. It's just so completely counterintuitive to every other part of Apple's media ecosystem and the way people think of magazines that it's shocking to me that no one's come up with a better way to do this, or that Apple hasn't said, okay, guys, guess what? This is how it's going to go. If you want to play ball, here's what you're going to have to do.
Okay, so B King in the chat room just said, "Is it so difficult to digitize the actual print mag?" Well, yes and no. And here's why it's so difficult for us to read. I said this the other day in a story, the one that Justin wrote. I believe that remember when you used to get a magazine and you would turn it upside down and all those cardboard ads would fall out?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, magazines now are trying to do the digital equivalent of that. And that's why the magazines that we have suck so bad on the iPad, because all the publishers can think about is, okay, how do we stick these little cardboard things in there so that, they get the ads, they get the specials that we have, and it's not going to work. You need to make something that is easy to read and that people will want to subscribe to. And right now, people don't want to subscribe to any of these magazines because they suck. It's the experience that sucks.
Do you think that publishers actually have, I don't know what the right word is, do they even have the ability to do that? Or does Apple have to take over and make an iMagazine app the way they have iTunes and kind of provide a uniform user experience and constrain the publishers so that they don't have a subscribe now banner when you've already subscribed?
I think that I don't think it's Apple's place to come in and say, this is how your magazine needs to be laid out, although it would be nice if they did. I mean, it would be great, but Apple has given publishers an avenue to go out and be able to sell their magazines and sell subscriptions to the magazines. And it seems clear that publishers just don't get it. They don't understand what their users want. And until they do understand, it's not going to work.
Is that I can tell you what I want, and it's not the exact copy of the print layout scanned and sized to fit my 10-inch display, and it's not 3 scrolling columns that go left and right and up and down that have videos in them. It's the content from the magazine laid out to fit the device that I'm viewing it on. And I think what publishers won't do is they won't put the money behind saying, okay, this is our print layout and this is our digital layout. They either do a digital layout that makes no sense at all to normal people who read magazines, or they just go, we'll just take this
export
Adobe
from
file.
InDesign. Yeah.
Exactly. And we're just going to crap it out onto the iPad, and that's what we're going to charge people for.
That's I think that's interesting because the publishing business it's not real. People think that the business of publishing is selling you a magazine, and seldom is it selling you a magazine. There's a massive advertising business behind it, and there's a massive demographic collection of data business behind it. And Jim can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's that sort of, that's why they'll almost give away magazines sometimes in order to have a large circulation, to collect demographics, to collect advertising revenue. And I don't know if the right people, if the creative people are actually in charge of the magazines, or it's more of an accounting sort of logistics people who are still driving it even in the digital age.
Well, you do have to account for the subscriptions that you have. So whether they're free or whether they're paid, that's why sometimes they try and get a credit card from you so that then they can count it as paid. So there are some details in there that to stop people from trying to fudge the numbers too much. I just think that people need to wake up in the publishing world and realize that, by having stupid things happen, like a subscribe banner when you're already subscribed, is just going to lose you customers, and it's going to give you bad press, and you're going to lose.
It's interesting. We have a very Google-heavy show tonight, and it's not because we're picking on them. It's because they're such a major player in the business today. But they released sort of their take on the digital magazine with Currents. Our sister site, Android Central, had it for a while, and they actually have an issue. The Android Central edition is available on Current already. And it's really a weird product from Google because they were the open web for so long. They had Google Reader. You just read the RSS. And now they're going full tilt into apps. I mean, Android is an app platform, not a web platform. Google Currents is an app, not a web protocol. And Seth, I found that interesting. I wonder if that's a new direction for Google, if they feel like they have to compete almost on an app-to-app level now.
Well, I think that, like, like with the regular web, they need to find ways to diversify their business model. And since their business model is ads, and they can only really do so much with ads in so many different ways, I think they're starting to kind of branch out this way, and they're starting to branch out more into engaging services. I'm going to call Google Plus an engaging service, even though I really don't much care for it. But they're looking for ways to actually get people involved in Google services. And I think this is probably another way to do it. And I think they're also looking at, the other platforms, iOS in particular, but also, definitely Windows Phone, and saying, wow, there's compelling experiences that these platforms are delivering that people seem to want. Maybe we should do that too. And it is kind of, I wonder if they're kind of sheepishly approaching it because they seem to be going full steam ahead, but it's got to kind of rankle them a little bit because it philosophically is very much opposed to what they've been saying this whole time. Like, it's not about apps, it's about the web and having everything accessible where you want it. And now they're kind of like shoving people into these little app experiences that I guess they're going to collect data or do something with ads, because that's what Google does, right?
Jim, is it fair to call this is Currents the same kind of response to Flipboard that Android is to the iPhone?
Well, yeah, it kind of is. But what's interesting, if you look at Apple's business model and what Apple says, when Steve Jobs did the demos of Safari and things like that, I mean, he makes a point to say, we have readers so that you can cut out all the ads and everything. And then you see Google, and Google was all about ads. So it's kind of funny, the dichotomy between the two of them and what they're trying to do. Apple is trying to make it very easy for people to go in and just read the text of what they want to read. And Google is trying to say, yeah, you can just read the text over here too, but here's a few little ads. So it's kind of interesting. But you are right. I mean, Google puts out a reader. They're going to put out whatever they feel people are going to use.
And they did it for iOS at the same time as Android, which is interesting too.
Yeah, well, why not? Why not get those millions of users and bring them on to Currents? You have, more ads, more page views, more whatever it's going to be, more downloads. That's what Google's looking for. Google is looking for quantity.
Yeah, eyeballs.
That's what they want, and it'll just keep going.
They also made a new version of because this is an interesting thing. When Apple launched the iPhone and the iPad, they made a point of it's got a great web browser, and I think inarguably people can quibble over Flash plugins, but inarguably Safari is the best web browser in mobile. It's got so much support for so many HTML5, CSS3 technologies. And Google is a website, but they've made another. They've actually not made it, but they've improved an app. So there's a Google search app, and now they're actually, I don't even think this is a search app. I think this is a website. They've created a carousel view optimized for tablets to kind of present images in a new way. So it's like a fragmentation of the web. Instead of just giving us a website, they're giving us a unique view of a website on almost like a screen per screen basis now. I'll throw that to Seth.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's an interesting kind of perspective because we're not used to Google framing things this way, kind of customizing views. They're usually just sucking data in and spitting it back out, however the people kind of want it. And so in the past, that's been Google Reader in a browser, and it's very, very Spartan and straightforward, and it's just text and images and ads and whatever else was in the post. And then people brought a lot of style to stuff like Google Reader by creating apps around it and using the Google Reader backend to create a more compelling news reading experience. And I think just the buzz that something like Flipboard has generated among people and creating kind of a magazine-like experience, but taking the content that you'd be reading anyway and just reformatting it in a nice way. I think it makes sense to Google to want to get into that game because they, pretty much everything runs through them at some point, right? Through search. So whether it's through Google Reader or just through the web in general, they can touch just about everything. So if they figure out a way to take all of the stuff that they have access to and frame it in a way that Android users and iOS users would enjoy, I think they're probably going to do it because it just means more content, more involvement with Google services and things like that, and of course sharing back out through Google Plus and all the things that they're trying to push in their agenda.
Well, and that's a great point, Seth, because Google does kind of frame everything that we do. We're the ones creating all the content for Google, but they're making a gazillion dollars off of everything that we do.
Is it a new battle now, Jim? Because Apple is kind of intermediating Google with Siri, and apps are intermediating them with Flipboard. So Google has to respond to kind of maintain their control of the frame with which web content is presented.
Well, I think that they have to respond in some way, and I think that they're starting to get the idea that people are getting they're getting picky about how they want things to be these days. They want it to be a good user experience. Now, whether Currents is a good user experience or not, I mean, it does similar things to Flipboard. I would say Flipboard is still better.
Yeah.
Pulse is another one.
Yeah.
That's a good app.
Early edition, very nice too.
Yeah. I just don't think that that Google has it yet. But, they know that they have to go out there. They know they have to do it.
And interestingly, the things that, for example, Google Reader was a de facto power behind RSS sync for the last couple of years, and now they're kind of toying with that to try to throw people into Google Plus, and in effect, making people nervous that maybe Google's not going to let other interfaces rely on Google Reader as that sync tool anymore, which again is kind of a small change in how Google's traditionally operated.
Yeah. I like Google Reader myself. I like the apps. Actually, I should qualify that. I like the apps that rely on Google Reader. Reader is a great app, and there are other apps out there that use it, but that's the one that I use, and I really like it.
And if Google decides that Google Reader is going to go away, or that they're not going to provide API support anymore, or it's only going to be API support for Current or for Google products, then it's going to be difficult for those other apps to actually have a syncing solution. They become dependent on Google. But I wonder, Seth, if this battle kind of heats up, if Google becomes more desperate because search is not the only way to get content anymore, whether we're going to start seeing them close that down a little bit, the way they kind of got rid of the free translate service.
Well, when the post about Google Reader changing and adding the social features to Google Plus or whatever that was, like maybe a month or two ago, when that came out, I wrote a little blurb about it and started a tiny fire around Twitter, just burning my own feet mostly, but as I tend to do. And I started to think about it, and I was like, all right, it's probably not that big of a deal. Probably not too much will change. But then as I started to, use Reader the way I do for the next couple of days and weeks, it started to dawn on me, like, this could just dry up and go away at one point. So I actually started to phase Google Reader out of my diet, which is crazy because I've been in it for so long. And before that, it was,
what else is there, right?
Yeah, well, that's just it. There isn't really another good syncing solution that has the API support or the backend or the speed or the structure that Google Reader has.
Other companies got rid of theirs to use Google Reader. They no longer, develop it.
Exactly. And there's a couple things floating around the web, but they really don't have a lot of support, or they've maybe fallen out of development. And it's hard to be a person that really enjoys consuming news this way and getting current stuff and having it sync across devices and across the web and have it work so well and then start to think like, wow, this might go away at some point. I know that seems naive because everything can go away at some point, but we don't think about these things when we have app experiences like we do with Reader on iOS that is so enjoyable. We don't think about the back end. You log in and that's it. You know, the app is your experience. You don't really think about the service and you kind of take it for granted. But I could definitely see Google tightening the screws a little bit the way Twitter did with third-party apps very easily.
That's the thing, Jim. A lot of times people wonder why we talk about Google, but I think a lot of people who use iOS and a lot of people who use Mac are also deeply invested in the Google ecosystem, whether it's Gmail or Google Search or Google Reader. It's not really an Apple or a Google topic. It's a people like us topic.
Well, it has to be kind of scary for everybody when we realize that there are no competing technologies for something like as widespread as RSS. You know, Google's basically got a lock on everything. And then all of a sudden they may go away. You have to think that, you know, there's a problem there somewhere for everybody.
What's interesting too, and I guess this is the last big story for the week, and it's a fairly tragic tale. It's almost Shakespearean in its tragedy, and it's the open sourcing of WebOS, from Palm's second Hail Mary to HP's attempt to get into the Apple-style integrated mobile ecosystem. To I don't even know what you'd call this. This is Jim. What's your take on this? Is there? My only question is, who's going to take WebOS? They already have Android, which is free. You've got all the ODMs invested in it. The carriers invested in it. Who's left to kind of pick up an open source WebOS?
This has got to be the most expensive open source project ever. $1 billion.
Yeah.
$1 billion. And the thing is, WebOS is really good. You know, and it kind of upsets me because I really thought that WebOS could give iOS a run for its money. I don't think that Android ever could give iOS a run for its money. I don't think that there's a company, a little Canadian company. It's called RIM.
Yeah.
I thought that maybe they could, but they're so incompetent that they can't even keep their executives sober. So apparently it's not going to be them. But I really thought the WebOS could do it. And boy, oh boy, the HP really screwed up, I think. So to answer your question about who could use it, you got to remember that these OEMs, all these different companies can take WebOS and put it on a device and see how it sells. You know, there are some apps, and developers, if they think that they can make some money, will go for it. But I guess it's going to have to depend on what happens over the next few months, maybe a year.
Seth, do you see anyone like maybe a Facebook or an Amazon picking up WebOS and actually putting out new hardware?
I don't know if I see somebody like Facebook or Amazon doing it, because I kind of feel like Amazon has made their choice, even though, I mean, anything's possible. I don't know about Facebook, because Facebook kind of has their own thing happening with their own kind of web environment. I guess if anybody did pick it up, Facebook would make the most sense, because WebOS being the kind of operating system it is, it would probably mesh the best with Facebook's kind of mentality. I would very much like to just see companies like HTC just throw out some devices with it on there and be like, hey, this is, we're diversifying our portfolio. What do you think of this? Just because I'd love to see what WebOS could do on a beefed up phone. I mean, that was the biggest problem with WebOS, was that the hardware was never doing it any justice.
And they always seem to, it was almost that syndrome, Jim, where you'd see the reviews, and when the second or third version came out, all the reviews say, oh, this is the one that it should have been at launch. And it was kind of always a step behind. And I just wonder if companies are going to have to invest a lot of money to make WebOS modern enough again after HP's neglected it for so long.
Well, and I think that Seth is exactly right, that what will happen is you'll get some companies that may want to branch out their device line and include a WebOS device. Seth's thoughts of Amazon are interesting. I would love to see somebody like Amazon take that. Now, Amazon has made their choice. I mean, Sock said it in the chat. Amazon made their choice, and they picked an earlier version of Android, and that's what they're building on. But I don't think any of us believe that the Fire is Android's tablet. They have something bigger and better that will be coming. So it might be nice to see Amazon pick that up and say, let's run with this instead, because Google's, got their fingers everywhere. Let's try and get away from that, which is, I think, what Amazon was doing by picking one of the earlier Android OSs anyway, trying to get away from Google.
There's such nice ideas, like the cards and stacks were a really nice metaphor for multitasking. Synergy, where it takes all the different data, kind of puts them into silos and then gives you a unified view of it. There's a lot of ideas there, and maybe if they are open source, we may not see a WebOS phone, but we'll see a version of maybe HTC Sense will use WebOS technology in it, or maybe Apple will pick up an aspect of it the way they picked up WebKit. Who knows? But I still think it's sad and kind of shameful the way that the WebOS story winded down.
I'd love to see Amazon do it. I really would. Just thinking about it now, I'd love to see Amazon pick up WebOS, because I think
Bezos has balls. He could do it.
Yeah, he has that kind of like, you know what? We're going to do this anyway, no matter what, and just plow ahead.
Cards look like books. Let's do it. All right, guys. I want to really thank you for joining us tonight. Jim, where can we find out more about you?
You can get it at loopinsight.com or J Dalrymple on Twitter. I'll actually post them in the room now.
You are a gentleman, sir. And Seth Clifford, what about you?
Seth Clifford on Twitter, on iPhone Live, on Iterate with Rene and Mark Edwards of the Django. And if you'd like to check out some of our apps and sites and some of the work that we do, please visit nfidm.com. We're Nickelfish.
You can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find me on tippy.com. You can email us at podcast@tippy.com or leave a comment when the show goes live on the blog. We're here every Sunday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Our companion show, iPhone Live. Seth, when is that on again?
Wednesday?
Something like Wednesday. Yeah.
Wednesday,
same bat time, same bat channel. For all of our podcasts, audio and video now, you can go to mobilenations.com/shows. That includes iPhone Live, iPad Live, Zen and Tech, Super Functional, Iterate, Girls Gone Gadget, and Android Central and Crackberry.com, which will probably refute and deny everything that we have said in this podcast, if given the chance. If you haven't already, please go to iTunes. Please subscribe to the show. Leave a rating. It encourages iTunes to feature us. I'd like to thank the Tippy iPad Accessory Store for sponsoring the podcast and everyone who showed up in the live chat. You guys are amazing. I want to thank Jim again. And if you haven't already, please go to loopinsight.com. Subscribe to Jim's RSS because he has been knocking it out of the park lately.
Thank you very much. Guys, it's so much fun to be here. I really appreciate it.
We'll have to do it again.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Next time I'm bringing Heineken and whiskey.
Nice. Chasers. We have the confirmation of Chasers.
Nice.
All right.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us.